Hello, thanks for stopping by. Hello, thank you for stopping by. My name is... Hello, thanks for stopping by. I'm Ruby, this is Ruby Red, and today I want to talk to you about something that I love in books, and that is food. This video is part of a series that I'm doing where I talk about the things that I love in books and the books that I love that have that thing in them. And I did the first video a few months ago and it was about books. But this is about books about food. Not even about food, just that like have some good food content in them. Because I love cooking and baking and eating and reading, and so when all of those things come together, it's just so good. So I'm going to talk about 8 books right now. All of them are 4 or 5 star reads to me. And please let me know some of your favorite food books in the comments, because what a wonderful genre or subgenre. Okay, we're going to start out with a book that I've talked about a lot on this channel, so I'm going to try to keep it brief, and that is Cinnamon and Gunpowder by Eli Brown. I gave this book 5 stars. I read it very early this year and I absolutely loved it. It is about a pirate who kidnaps a chef in the 1810s, whatever, and he has to then live on the pirate ship and cook a fantastic meal for the captain once a week or be killed. So the book is about his journey, his character arc, his, transformative experience living on this pirate ship. But what I loved was just the descriptions of the meals that he was making, because several of them are, discussed in depth, and we kind of have to watch him scramble to put them together because he's on a pirate ship. And just sort of using what's at hand. So that, does mean that he's cooking a lot of seafood, which is not something that I've ever really enjoyed. So even though the meals aren't things that necessarily I would want to actually eat, the description was fantastic. And again, it was really about the journey and the quest for ingredients and the ingenuity, the creativity. That was fantastic. So really fun food book. And I will try not to talk about that book again for a long time. Another book about food that I absolutely love is Sourdough by Robin Sloan. I gave this book 5 stars as well. This book is about a woman named Lois who lives and works in San Francisco. She works in robotics, and through a bizarre turn of events finds herself in possession of this sourdough starter and tasked with taking care of it for an undetermined amount of time. And it's in San Francisco, so it's a very sourdough centric city, or at least there's definitely a sourdough culture that she kind of gets involved in, and she starts learning all about sourdough and yeast and baking bread, and she kind of just goes down this rabbit hole, which was super interesting and delicious to read. Even the description of this soup that she eats right at the beginning. Wow. Anyway, the main focus of the story is kind of what happens when she gets involved with this group of food pioneers, this group of people who are doing wacky things with food, and she gets in with them, and then she starts doing wacky things. And yeah, I absolutely adored this book. I got everyone I know to read it because I just thought it was so good and so just such a unique kind of a story, because it's about bread, but it's also about all this other stuff. I mean, that's how books are, but yeah, I really love this one. Wow. Okay, this next one is tricky. This is My Year of Meats by Ruth Ozeki. This was my first experience with this author's writing, and I am now a huge fan. But this book, also 5 star from me, is about a documentarian who gets hired to work for this Japanese reality TV show, or I don't know if it's reality TV, but it's it kind of is, about Americans and their most famous and beloved meat dishes, and the whole show is being sponsored by a meat exporter, I think. Beef is best. But our main character, I forget her name, but she's you know, she's a journalist, but this is just, you know, you take the jobs as they come, but she kind of turns it into like some journalistic show where she starts to get more and more like investigative footage and sort of looking into some of the unsavory elements of the meat industry. And her story kind of intersects or connects with a Japanese woman whose husband works for the company that the show is sponsored by or something, kind of convoluted, but it's, you know, it's about this documentarian, but it's also just about power and information and probably some other stuff that I don't really remember because I read it several years ago, but it has stuck with me as a book that I just really, really liked. And there are some cooking scenes because the show is, you know, getting recipe content basically from these American housewives. And all of that was like kind of yucky, but just the way that it all is like tied together, maybe a little bit satirical, definitely a little bit uncomfortable, but Ruth Ozeki is a fantastic author, and so this book was a fantastic book in my opinion. I loved it. Okay, let's move on to something a little more delicious, and that is Gingerbread by Helen Oyeyemi. This book is rated pretty low on Goodreads, but I did give it 4 stars. But I kind of get the low rating. It's weird and confusing. I feel like parts of it read a little bit like I wasn't sure if this was a dream or reality. Like I couldn't tell how speculative or how fantastical this book was meant to be and how much of it was like a dream. But it's about a family who has this secret gingerbread recipe that has been, you know, passed down through generations, and it's kind of a magical gingerbread. It, I think, like can cast all kinds of spells. Not like cast spells, but like, you know, it brings luck or good fortune or whatever. It's not like over the top magical, it's just like a little bit magical. And it is heavy-handed. That's something that I loved about that part of the story, the discussion of the actual gingerbread. It's so heavily spiced that it, you know, burns your mouth to eat it, but it's so delicious that you can't stop, kind of a thing. So I was really fascinated by that concept of just having like this family recipe of really, really intense gingerbread. But I also just, some of the things that happened in that book had me like, how did you think of that? How did you think to put that in a book? It was just so weird. And it was, to me, very fun, but I guess to many other people it was kind of off-putting, or just too confusing to bother. But if you're interested in like a weird time, then this book is for you. At its heart, it's about 3 generations of women who have been ostracized from their community and have been forced to flee their homeland and make a new home for themselves, a new life for themselves, and like what happens when dark pasts come knocking. But it's also about the gingerbread, you know? Okay, the next book is another really fun one that you may have heard about if you've been watching my videos for a while, and that is Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors by Sonali Dev. I give this book 5 stars. It is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but it's about food. So our Lizzie Bennet character is DJ, who is a professional chef. And then the Mr. Darcy is Trish Rajay, who is a very successful, but not very socially adept surgeon. And they are thrown together in a couple of different scenarios and they clash, and then, you know, it's Pride and Prejudice. But there is so much good food. Oh my gosh. Even the first interaction that they have involves like a pot of caramel for some like cashew little hors d'oeuvre thing. I don't even remember. And like this pot of amazing rice. It all just was so delicious. There's so many different kinds of food that are talked about in this and that are being cooked. And there are a few events, so there's like fancy foods and then there's like casual, just at home foods. And even within the rest of this series, at least in the next 2 books, there is more food and chefiness, but this book I think, has the best food. And it was really good food. Wow. Okay, now I want to talk about kind of a shocking turn of events, something that I didn't expect to be putting on this list, but I'm definitely putting on this list, and that is Vladimir by Julia May Jonas, which I gave 4 stars to, which is not really a book about food. It's a book about a English professor. Her husband also works at the same college, and he has been like temporarily suspended, or he's being maybe fired because of inappropriate relations with a student, sexual assault allegations, etc. So there's that whole thing going on. Meanwhile, she has kind of grown obsessed with this new younger professor in the department. So there's a lot of elements that kind of come together to make this woman's life like a bit of a disaster, and there is lots of discussion on optics and guilt and victimhood and academia, but more importantly, there is a scene. Actually, okay, there's 2 scenes. The first scene is one in which she is cooking like a comfort meal for her daughter who is having a bad time, and just the way that it's written, the way that she's going through these emotions almost automatically to create like a beautiful but simple little carbonara, I think, but she's done it a million times, so it's the prose just really flows, and I just could like feel in my bones like the automatic ease of something that is so like delicious and simple but like so comforting, and it just like brings you back to all the other times you made it before, and it's almost a thoughtless exercise in the kitchen, and I really loved that scene. I think that is one of the most fun things to be unexpectedly presented with when you're reading. But the main thing is later she is grocery shopping. I wish that I had a copy of this book so that I could read it to you right now. She goes grocery shopping, and the narration of that scene of like the things that she selects and why she selects them, and oh, we have some of this to go with that, and it just like, and she's clearly walking through like a Whole Foods, so everything is kind of like too much, it's over the top. And she is noticing that and is like, oh yes, I'm going to buy the overpriced olives because, oh, you just can't have, you know, whatever else without the olives, and it's so good. It was perfect. That was the best scene in that book, and it was so good and so like, again, visceral. Like reading it, I was like, I'm in Whole Foods going wild for something, you know, that I don't need to go wild for. So good. That book is amazing. Okay, now let's just segue into the last 2 books, which are nonfiction. And the first one is Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer, and this I gave 5 stars. So this is a book about eating animals and the ethics of consumption and the complicated issues that spring up when you take a closer look at eating animals. And I think what's most important about this book, and most like, this is maybe the best book on this kind of topic that I have read or encountered, because he's approaching the topic neutrally. The inspiration to write this book came from him becoming a father and realizing that now he has to decide how to feed another person, like has to be responsible for the eating habits of a whole other human, and teaching that human how to consume responsibly and what does that mean, and how those kinds of choices also play in with culture and family and history and that kind of thing. So it's partly about those more personal decisions, and also just very well researched exploration of various animal agricultural industries and components. A really interesting book, and again, so valuable because the focus is not on judgment or guilt or, you know, persuasion. He really is coming at the issue from a neutral place and is sort of just like, he's like, I'm learning this with you right now. So that kind of attitude, I think, makes it very readable, whereas some books about eating animals are maybe a little bit less neutral and more like alarming, or might make a reader feel more attacked or guilted or shamed. So I don't really know who to recommend this to. I do think that if you already are a vegetarian or a vegan, there's definitely a lot of stuff in this book that will help you to talk about that with people without that guilting or shaming element that those conversations can have. And if you're just curious about some of that stuff, then I think that this is a very nice way to find out more information with kind of a very low pressure read. I think that's how I remember the book, but I read it a couple of years ago, but I have a copy and I do plan to reread it someday because, again, I thought it was great. Okay, the last book, sorry that got heavy for a second. The last book is The Food Explorer: The True Adventures of the Globetrotting Botanist Who Transformed What America Eats by Daniel Stone. So this book is the story of David Fairchild, who in the late 1800s basically traveled the world sending back seeds and fruits and other like cuttings and plants and stuff to America in an effort to not only expand like the American diet, but more so to find new crops that could be grown and that would be profitable and also like popular. So he definitely commits some crimes. There's some questionable ethics in his practice and in his methods. And he works for, I think, a few different groups. There is like one specific benefactor who sells him around, and then he's also working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture or something to import these seeds and figure out how to grow what and what there's a market for and all of that. But some of the things that he's sending back, some of these seeds are very protected by their communities and their countries, and so he's definitely straight up stealing from people who did not want to share their fruits. But there is so much like just interesting stuff about where some of the foods and the fruits that we eat came from and what other varieties existed or were first being harvested that like weren't going over well, and like what kind of crossbreeding they did and all that stuff. It's very, very interesting. It's kind of long though, and I think that's why I gave it 4 stars. I didn't think it needed to be that long, but so much fun fruit stuff in that book. Yeah, I think that this was a very transformative time in American history, and so I don't know, the time was just right for him to be so passionate about something so kind of weird and to be able to actually do it and be successful and really change the American food landscape. So fascinating read. And those are my 8 books. Those are my 8 favorite books that are kind of about food. I do have a couple of honorable mentions to just offer because I did just read Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly, and that was involved a cooking show, and there is some good cooking in that book, but it's mostly a romance. There's not that much cooking, so that's why it's just an honorable mention. Also, The Martian by Andy Weir. This is a book about farming potatoes in space. And also this book, The Kitchen Front by Jennifer Ryan, I think, which was about a cooking competition between a couple of women in England in like a small town in the years of, I believe, the First World War, and basically they're competing to be a co-host on this radio program that would offer recipes and ideas to help home cooks, housewives, make their rations go further, and like how to cook delicious foods with like weird ration leftovers, etc. So that was a very fascinating concept, but the overall execution I thought was just fine. And also, I'm just gonna shout this out, like if you also love food and food content, the podcast Gastropod is very good. They just have episodes that focus specifically on one kind of food usually. Like there's a garlic one, there's a pepper one, there's a carrots one, there's like whatever, any kind of food stuffs. They've probably got an episode where they just like deep dive into the ingredient, the history, the science, the whatever. It's very interesting. So there's probably a link for that down below if I remembered. And that concludes this episode of Things That I Love in Books. So thanks for sticking around. Let me know if you've read any of these or if you're gonna read any of these. And absolutely, please, please tell me some of your favorite food books in the comments, because I would like to read some more. So thank you and goodbye.